Thick, toxic gray smoke billowed heavily from the outskirts of the towering stone Capitol walls. Thousands of starving, desperate refugees huddled helplessly together along the muddy, unpaved roads. The terrifying rumor of a lethal demonic plague had turned the entire crowded sanctuary into a living nightmare. Corrupt church officials routinely gathered the sick and carelessly threw them into deep, blazing ash pits. Far beyond the sight of the city guard, a disciplined unit of Roland's elite soldiers moved into position. They carefully set up large, hidden canvas tents deep within the protective cover of the forest. Wooden crates filled to the brim with clear glass vials of the magical cure were carefully unloaded. The commanding officer ordered his men to distribute the remedy freely to every single infected soul. Trusted undercover scouts quietly slipped into the massive refugee crowds to whisper the secret location. A frail young mother hesitantly carried her shivering, feverish child toward the tree line. A gentle border town medic immediately handed her a sparkling vial without asking for a single coin. Within mere minutes of drinking the strange fluid, the child's deadly black fever completely vanished. Word of the miraculous free cure spread like wildfire through the entire suffering encampment. High atop the stone walls, a senior church inquisitor stared down at the rapidly emptying plains. He knew their carefully manufactured propaganda of divine punishment was completely falling apart. Meanwhile, Roland's officers systematically interviewed every single refugee who entered the forest camp. They specifically sought out experienced blacksmiths, masons, and skilled laborers for Border Town. Hundreds of eager artisans eagerly signed the contracts to secure a brand new life. Roland's strategy successfully turned a devastating humanitarian crisis into a massive industrial recruitment drive. Deep within the dark, treacherous underbelly of the capital city, a different operation was unfolding. A clever and notorious underground informant, known as Hill Fox, carefully checked her surroundings. She adjusted her heavy dark cloak and stepped quietly into a smoky, hidden tavern. Sitting in the furthest corner was an undercover agent wearing the distinct mark of Border Town. He slid a heavy, jingling leather pouch filled with pure gold coins across the table. Hill Fox's amber eyes instantly lit up as she expertly caught the valuable payment. She leaned forward and whispered critical intelligence regarding the church's hidden supply lines. The church was secretly accumulating massive amounts of holy elixir for an upcoming military campaign. This vital information would allow Prince Roland to anticipate their next major strategic offensive. The agent nodded in satisfaction, confirming that her monthly retainer would be doubled. Hill Fox smiled dynamically, realizing her new employer possessed far greater wealth than the local nobility. Outside the walls, the massive evacuation of recovered refugees continued throughout the cold night. Large fleets of heavy wooden transport wagons slowly began their long journey toward Border Town. Roland's vision of an industrialized empire was rapidly gaining the vital workforce it desperately required. Back in the capital, the church high command realized their total loss of authority over the peasantry. They vowed to completely annihilate the rebellious prince and every single peasant who followed him. The underground network established by Hill Fox began to show signs of severe external pressure. Elite church inquisitors had already started conducting brutal house-to-house searches looking for treasonous materials. Despite the extreme danger, the flow of critical information and refugees did not stop. Roland's operations had successfully delivered a devastating blow to the church's absolute control. But a dark, sinister presence was currently moving within the shadows of the senior priest's private chambers. The fluid suddenly began to rise and warp into the terrifying, shifting silhouette of a human being. A cold, terrifying voice echoed through the room as the shape-shifting witch known as Faceless slowly materialized. The shifting silhouette of the witch Faceless solidified completely within the dimly lit stone chamber. Across the heavy mahogany desk, the senior priest kept his cold, unblinking eyes locked on her reforming figure. He slammed a leather-bound ledger onto the desk, scattering several holy parchment sheets onto the floor. Reports from the outer capital walls had confirmed that the church's monopoly on the holy cure was completely shattered. Prince Roland's smugglers were systematically distributing a perfect antidote entirely for free to the desperate refugees. This massive operation was actively bleeding the church of its political leverage over the suffering masses. The old priest leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling growl that filled the silence. He ordered Faceless to travel north immediately and infiltrate the very heart of the border town encampment. Her primary objective was to assassinate the ringleaders and systematically sabotage the production lines of the cure. Faceless bowed her head, her facial features dissolving into a smooth, featureless surface of pale flesh. Within a single heartbeat, she dissolved back into a cloud of black mist and drifted through the narrow window bars. Days later, the cold northern winds howled across the fortified borders of Prince Roland's territory. Heavily armed guards patrolled the wooden palisades, their hands resting firmly on the grips of their flintlock rifles. Inside the camp perimeter, hundreds of rescued refugees worked diligently alongside the local laborers. Hidden among a dense tree line just outside the southern gate, a shadowy figure watched the bustling activity. Faceless carefully observed the shifting guard rotations, looking for any gap in the defensive perimeter. She noticed a tired female refugee walking alone toward the outer storage sheds to fetch clean water. The peasant woman suddenly stopped as a strange, icy chill gripped the air around her. Before she could utter a single cry, dark mist surged out from the bushes and completely enveloped her. The mist receded a moment later, leaving only one woman standing there holding the wooden bucket. Adjusting her stolen woolen shawl, the disguised witch walked calmly toward the fortified camp gates. A vigilant guard stepped into her path, raising his hand to halt her progress for identification. Faceless immediately lowered her gaze, mimicking the timid posture and trembling voice of a frightened refugee. Satisfied by her perfectly fabricated identity, the guard stepped aside and allowed her to pass into the interior. Once inside the crowded inner courtyard, a cold, predatory smile flashed across the witch's face. She bypassed the busy residential tents and slithered toward the heavily guarded medical research sector. Two elite guards stood at absolute attention outside the entrance of the primary alchemical laboratory. Realizing a head-on physical approach would sound the alarm, Faceless ducked behind a wooden water tower. Her body melted once more, transforming rapidly into the exact likeness of a high-ranking camp supervisor. Striding out from the darkness, she commanded the two guards to immediately check the northern fence line. The disciplined guards saluted promptly, turned on their heels, and marched off toward the perimeter. With the entrance completely clear, Faceless smoothly unlocked the heavy iron latch of the laboratory door. She slipped inside the quiet building, finding herself surrounded by rows of glass flasks and intricate pipes. On the central table sat a massive glass vat containing the freshly synthesized batch of the plague cure. Faceless drew a small vial of highly concentrated black church poison from within her heavy leather coat. She tilted her hand slowly, allowing the lethal black drops to fall directly into the glowing blue medicine. Suddenly, the heavy laboratory door was violently kicked open, banging loudly against the stone wall. Prince Roland Wimbledon stood in the doorway, surrounded by a dozen elite soldiers aiming loaded firearms. The disguised witch froze instantly, her hand still holding the empty poison vial over the tainted vat. Roland barked a single definitive command to fire, shattering the tense silence of the laboratory. A deafening volley of rifle fire erupted as a dozen lead bullets tore directly toward her shifting form. Far away from the blood-soaked borders where guns decided the fate of kings, Princess Tilly stood firmly on the wooden deck of her flagship. The icy sea spray lashed against the heavy hull as the fleet pressed deeper into uncharted, mist-shrouded waters. She held a faded leather map tightly in her hand, its complex lines pointing toward the mythical Phantom Island. The sailors whispered fearful rumors about the island, claiming it was a cursed graveyard for anyone who dared to seek its secrets. Tilly ignored their superstitions, knowing that unlocking ancient magical knowledge was the only way to aid the witch resistance. Suddenly, the dense curtain of fog parted to reveal the jagged black cliffs of an isolated landmass rising from the surf. The iron-reinforced anchors dropped with a deafening rattle, securing the vessels in a shallow, rocky bay. A small landing party composed of trusted witches and elite guards lowered wooden rowboats into the swelling tide. Each stroke of the oars brought them closer to the eerie silence of the desolate shore. As her boots sank into the damp, dark sand, Tilly noticed crumbling stone pillars half buried under creeping vines. The architecture did not match any known style of the current kingdoms, suggesting a civilization lost to time. Tilly pointed toward a massive archway that led directly into the heart of a hollowed-out mountain. The guards ignited pitch torches, casting long, dancing shadows across the damp stone floor of the cavern. The air inside grew warmer, carrying a faint, static charge that made the hair on their arms stand up. Deep within the mountain, the tunnel opened into an immense, cavernous chamber filled with monolithic ruins. Innumerable crystal clusters protruded from the walls, pulsing with a vibrant, rhythmic azure light. One of the accompanying witches extended her hand, feeling a torrential surge of raw magical energy radiating through the air. This was not ordinary magic. It was a concentrated, stable source of power left behind by an ancient era. Tilly realized that if Roland could combine this resource with his industrial machinery, their power would be limitless. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, they encountered a massive, seamless metal wall blocking their path. The metal door possessed no handles, keyholes, or visible seams, defying all conventional methods of entry. In the center of the structure sat an intricate circular indentation carved with complex geometric runes. A heavy metallic clanking echoed through the chamber as the guards tried to pry it open with iron crowbars. The metal did not scratch or bend, absorbing their physical impacts without leaving a single mark. Tilly ordered them to step back, recognizing that this ancient lock required magic rather than brute force. She called forward her most powerful arcane scholar, a witch specializing in energy manipulation. The witch placed both palms onto the circular runes, channeling her internal magic into the dead mechanism. The ancient mechanism roared to life, its concentric rings spinning rapidly while emitting a high-pitched hum. Heavy dust cascaded from the ceiling as the immense metal segments slid apart, revealing a dark, long-hidden chamber. Tilly stepped through the threshold, her boots clicking softly on an incredibly polished, glass-like floor. The room contained rows of floating metallic archives holding manuscripts preserved perfectly by stasis fields. These archives held the foundational blueprints of a lost era where magic and science were seamlessly unified. This discovery meant they could bypass decades of standard technological research by adopting these ancient formulas. However, their celebration was cut short as a deep, structural tremor shook the entire underground complex. The activation of the vault had triggered an ancient self-defense system designed to bury the secrets forever. Red, glowing defense runes illuminated the walls, and stone blocks began sealing the exit pathways. Tilly grabbed 3 of the primary data cylinders, shouting for everyone to evacuate immediately. A massive chunk of the stone ceiling crashed down right between Tilly and the rest of her fleeing crew. Trapped behind a wall of solid rubble, she could hear the muffled shouts of her guards through the thick stone. From the deep darkness of the unmapped tunnels behind her, a low, mechanical growl began to resonate. The lingering resonance of ancient ruins and subterranean echoes faded into memory as focus shifted entirely back to the bustling, smoke-filled workshops of Bordertown. Prince Roland stood beside a heavy wooden workbench, his eyes scanning a series of detailed chemical equations scrawled across a piece of rough parchment. The synthesis of a reliable priming compound remained the final, crucial obstacle preventing the mass production of self-contained metallic cartridges. Nearby, Chief Alchemist Kyle Sichi carefully measured out precise quantities of pure mercury, nitric acid, and ethanol inside a thick glass beaker. A small group of senior witches watched the delicate procedure from a safe distance, ready to intervene with their magic if the volatile compounds reacted poorly. The chemical solution began to bubble vigorously, releasing a thick, pungent white vapor that quickly filled the upper rafters of the laboratory room. Suddenly, an unexpected thermal runaway caused the glass beaker to crack open, spilling the boiling acid across the iron-plated tabletop. A loud, deafening explosion rocked the entire eastern wing of the castle, shattering the nearby stained glass windows into thousands of glittering fragments. Roland was thrown backward onto the floor, coughing violently as the thick gray smoke obscured his vision and stung his watering eyes. Fortunately, the defensive magic barriers raised by the witches had absorbed the brunt of the flying shrapnel, keeping everyone in the room alive. As the heavy smoke slowly cleared from the room, Kyle Sichi crawled back toward the ruined workbench to inspect the aftermath of the accident. Nestled within a small, unburned indentation of the iron plate lay a fine deposit of grayish-white crystals that had survived the intense blast. Against all mathematical odds, The chaotic chemical accident had perfectly synthesized the exact batch of mercury fulminate needed for their military advancement. Without losing a single moment, the mechanical design team immediately integrated the explosive powder into their experimental cartridge manufacturing line. Thousands of sleek percussion caps were rapidly filled with the new compound, marking the birth of modern ammunition within the medieval realm. In the neighboring armory, mechanical assembly machines pressed lead bullets into the brass casings, completing the first standardized infantry cartridges. Roland held up one of the finished, heavy cartridges, admiring the smooth metallic finish that would soon render traditional armor completely obsolete. On the training grounds outside the city walls, a line of selected soldiers stood ready to test the newly manufactured ammunition type. The commanding officer raised his iron saber high into the air, signaling the riflemen to load their weapons and prepare for the volley. With a synchronized mechanical click, the soldiers chambered their rounds, the smooth action of the steel bolts echoing across the open field. A simultaneous roar of gunfire erupted from the line, sending a dense cloud of gray gun smoke drifting across the grassy training grounds. Several hundred yards away, thick steel target plates were instantly punched through, leaving jagged, clean holes where the heavy lead rounds impacted. The military observers cheered wildly, realizing that this technological breakthrough would secure border towns' safety against any royal or religious army. Word of the successful weapon test spread quickly through the city, igniting an atmosphere of celebration among the hardworking citizens and laborers. To honor this massive milestone, Prince Roland ordered the construction of a grand pavilion in the central plaza for a historic award ceremony. Hundreds of colorful pennants and silk banners fluttered in the autumn breeze, transforming the industrial town into a vibrant tapestry of unity. As night began to fall, thousands of citizens gathered around the illuminated stage, their faces filled with hope for a peaceful future. Prince Roland ascended the wooden steps of the pavilion, dressed in a magnificent dark blue dress uniform lined with silver embroidery. He raised his hands to quiet the cheering crowd, his voice carrying clearly over the plaza thanks to a newly installed sound-amplifying horn. Tonight we celebrate not just a victory of steel and powder, but the undeniable triumph of our shared intellect and courage, Roland declared passionately. He first called forward the civilian representatives, starting with Chief Alchemist, Kyle Sichi, who walked up the steps with tears of joy in his eyes. Roland pinned a gleaming silver star of innovation onto the old man's robes, cementing his place in the history books of the new empire. The crowd erupted into deafening applause as more factory workers, engineers, and miners stepped forward to receive their hard-earned civic medals. Next, Roland turned his attention to the military forces, inviting the brave commanders and soldiers who had defended their borders against outside tyranny. Golden medals of honor were awarded to the veteran soldiers who had risked everything to protect the fragile flame of their industrial revolution. In a historical and unprecedented move, Roland called the Alliance of Witches to step onto the stage under the bright public lights. For the first time in centuries, the witches were not met with fear or hatred, but with a roaring standing ovation from the thousands of citizens below. Roland presented their leader with a beautifully crafted crystal plaque, symbolizing the eternal partnership between magic and technological advancement. A spectacular display of colorful alchemical fireworks suddenly launched into the night sky, bursting into massive patterns of emerald green and sapphire blue. The corrupt old world of religious oppression and feudal ignorance was officially crumbling away, replaced by the unstoppable dawn of an enlightened industrial empire.